Charles Bronson was a tough Hollywood actor who rarely smiled on screen and almost never talked about his personal life. People around the world loved watching him in movies like Death Wish and The Mechanic. But recently, someone found a diary that was supposed to be his, and it shocked everyone. In his diary, mixed in with stories about his work and time making movies, he wrote a whole section called The Women I Despise the Most. One was a young actress who was 42 years younger than him. People said she faked being married to him to steal his money from his stepchildren. Another was a girlfriend who got too close to a movie director, which made Bronson so mad that he left the movie set for 3 whole days. There was even someone who spread lies saying he had a romantic relationship with a famous male actor, which almost destroyed his career. So who were these women that made this quiet man so angry? And which one did Charles Bronson hate more than anyone else? Chapter 1. Elizabeth Taylor, the woman who made Bronson feel uncomfortable. Maggie the cat is alive. I'm alive. Why are you afraid of the truth? It was summer 1974 in Hollywood. Inside a fancy meeting room at the Beverly Hills Hotel, the crystal lights sparkled on Elizabeth Taylor's beautiful purple dress. On the table were unfinished scripts for a movie called Ash Wednesday, which she wanted to make herself with a company called EMI. During the busy discussion, Taylor leaned back in her chair, swirled her glass of white wine around, and said, "If anyone can show silent pain, it has to be Charles Bronson." Everyone at the table went quiet for a few seconds. Bronson was 53 years old then. He was the star of Death Wish and The Mechanic, and he was known for being so quiet that hardly anyone felt brave enough to talk to him. The next day, they sent him an official job offer at the MGM office where he worked. Taylor got back a reply so short it felt cold. "I don't act for queens." A movie critic named Roger Ebert, who talked to Bronson later in Chicago, said the actor wasn't kidding around. "I think he was really uncomfortable with the way Taylor took control of a room," Ebert wrote. Bronson didn't believe in that kind of power. He grew up with people who worked hard, not people made fancy by being famous. Elizabeth Taylor was born in Hampstead, England, to a rich family. MGM Studios treasured her like a jewel from the time she was a child. But that same spotlight also tied her life to many, many scandals. By the time Taylor was 18, she was already famous all over the world for movies like National Velvet and A Place in the Sun. She was also at the center of Hollywood's most talked-about romances. She got married 8 times to 7 different men, a record that still hasn't been beaten. In the 1960s, the whole world watched the fiery love affair between Taylor and Richard Burton begin on the set of a movie called Cleopatra in Rome. At that time, Taylor was married to a man named Eddie Fisher, and Burton had a wife too. From their very first scene together, the chemistry was so strong that the director, Joseph L. Mankiewicz, had to stop filming. In his diary, he wrote, "I saw sparks that could burn down the entire studio." 9 weeks later, photographers caught Taylor and Burton leaving the Excelsior Hotel together at night. The photo was printed on the front page of a newspaper, called Daily Express on March 27, 1962. People described it as a slap in the face to the Vatican. The Vatican is like the headquarters of the Catholic Church, and they even made a public statement saying the affair was a public insult to marriage. But Taylor came out of the scandal looking totally calm. She walked the red carpet in London with Burton, holding her head high. Her little smile seemed to dare the world to judge her. They got married, then divorced, then got married again in 1975, like each breakup was just another chapter in a never-ending story. Bronson used to be a coal miner in Pennsylvania. To him, marriage was sacred and shouldn't be treated like a game. In 1975, during an interview in New York, a journalist named Alan Katz asked what he thought about Hollywood's noisy romances. Bronson answered, "Some people change wedding rings like they change roles." No one asked any more questions, but everyone knew who he was talking about. Across the ocean in England, Elizabeth Taylor was filming a movie called The Bluebird in London. When a Times reporter named Susan Bilson asked her about Bronson's comment, Taylor just smiled, took a sip of wine, and said, "And he's giving lessons on love now? Let him keep doing his violent movies." They never met again after that, but people kept bringing up their names and behind-the-scenes stories for years. One represented silence. The other represented being dramatic. One lived to stay away from the spotlight. The other was born to enjoy it. When Elizabeth Taylor died in 2011, the Los Angeles Times wrote, "Among the thousands of people mourning her, if Charles Bronson were still alive, he would probably stay silent, as always." A silence that meant he looked down on her. Chapter 2. Brigitte Bardot, the woman who made Bronson promise never to work together again. In the early 1970s, Paris was the heart of movie-making. France's national icon, Brigitte Bardot, was at its center. Meanwhile, Charles Bronson, the tough American guy, was super famous after making Once Upon a Time in the West. They seemed like they came from completely different worlds, but fate brought them together in spring 1971 in a fancy hotel room at the George V Hotel. A producer named Serge Silberman was starting a movie called L'Aventure. It was based on a novel by Georges Simenon. He wanted Bardot as the main actress and Bronson as a widower who gets pulled into a tense love affair. A newspaper called Le Figaro described their first meeting as a collision between two planets with opposite gravity. The script reading lasted less than an hour. Bardot arrived late wearing a brown leather jacket, carrying her dog named Cleo, and smoking cigarettes one after another. Bronson sat up straight, stayed silent, and gave her a cold stare. When Bardot tried making jokes to break the awkward tension, he didn't respond at all. Someone who was there told Premiere magazine, "No one dared to speak." The whole room froze. 2 days later, Bardot quit the project. She said she couldn't work with a man who made her shiver. The role went to an actress named Simone Signoret, and the movie became a hit. But for Bardot, it was the first and last time she would ever share a project with Charles Bronson. The story seemed over until 1973. That year, Bronson amazed Hollywood with Death Wish. While Bardot was getting heavy criticism in Europe for a movie called Don Juan, or If Don Juan Were a Woman. The movie was directed by Roger Vadim, who was her ex-husband. A newspaper called Le Monde called it a failed experiment between desire and female power. Conservative critics, people who believed in traditional values, saw it as an attack on social values. That same year, Bardot posed topless for a magazine, which caused public outrage. When reporters in Rome asked Bronson about the wave of female freedom that Bardot represented, he replied shortly, "I don't see freedom in showing everything just to be noticed." The next day, a newspaper called Corriere della Sera had a headline that said, "Bronson aims his gun at Bardot." By the late 1990s, Bardot had turned to activism, working to protect animals and speaking out about social issues. But her public statements caused big debates all across the country. Her 1997 book, L'Art de Pleurer, which means The Art of Crying, had strong opinions about immigration and religion. This led to legal trouble. Over 10 years, she was convicted 5 times for making divisive speeches, statements that divided people and caused fights. But she calmly told France, "I only say what I think, even if the world hates me." For Bronson, who grew up poor and believed in discipline, those remarks crossed the final line of respect. In a 1998 Time magazine interview, he said, "I grew up among quiet people who worked honestly. She lives on noise. Those worlds will never meet." From then on, no European movie project dared mention Bardot and Bronson in the same sentence. Between them, there was no big fight. They were just two people who saw in each other everything they refused to become. Chapter 3. Ingrid Bergman, the angel who fell from grace. It was May 1975, inside the Grand Hall of the Carlton Hotel. Camera flashes went off non-stop. Ingrid Bergman, the icon from movies like Casablanca and Gaslight, walked through the crowd. Her smile made the whole room go quiet. A few rows away sat Charles Bronson with his arms crossed and eyes cold as stone. When Bergman came closer and softly said something only he could hear, Bronson just nodded and turned away. The moment was captured by a photographer named Jean-Paul Gérard. It appeared on the front page of Le Monde newspaper with the caption, "One look, two worlds." They looked polite on the outside, but behind the scenes, rumors said Bronson didn't like Bergman at all. Why? The story began almost 25 years earlier with a scandal that shocked America. In 1949, Ingrid Bergman was the most beloved actress in the United States. But she left Hollywood and went to Italy to film a movie called Stromboli with a director named Roberto Rossellini. At the time, Bergman was married to a doctor named Peter Lindstrom, and they had a daughter. Rossellini also had a family. But within weeks, the Los Angeles Herald reported, Ingrid Bergman leaves husband, expecting child with Italian director. The news spread like wildfire. NBC canceled her contracts and theaters in the South refused to show her films. A senator named Edwin Johnson even declared before Congress, Hollywood has produced an enemy of morality. Overnight, Bergman's image as a pure woman collapsed. She went from Hollywood's brightest star to a name that got erased from movie posters. But what made the public both angry and fascinated was how Bergman faced the storm. She didn't make excuses or apologize. She left America, lived with Rossellini in Italy, had 3 children with him, and kept making films like nothing had happened. In a 1953 Life magazine article, a journalist named Jean Lester described her as a woman who would burn heaven itself just to keep a small flame for herself. By 1956, Bergman came back to Hollywood with a movie called Anastasia. She won an Oscar and her fame was restored. The press called it Hollywood's greatest redemption. But to Charles Bronson, it was nothing but fake forgiveness. Bronson was born into a family of 15 children in the coal mines of Pennsylvania. He believed that honor was the one thing a person must never lose. To him, Bergman wasn't a brave woman like the media said. She was someone who was only forgiven because she was beautiful and famous. A reporter from the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner remembered that when someone asked Bronson about Bergman, he simply said, "I don't understand why people applaud someone who gave up everything she once preached." Since then, even though they showed up at many international events, he always kept his distance. No fights, no drama, just quiet disapproval. And maybe that silence said everything. To Bronson, Ingrid Bergman wasn't a fallen angel. She was the perfect example of Hollywood's half-true, half-false morality that he hated most. As for Bergman, she probably saw Bronson as just a man who was too strict, too closed off to realize that sometimes people make mistakes simply because they want to live honestly. But when it came to love and betrayal, no one had deeper scars than Bronson. That's because it once happened in his own life with the woman he loved most, Jill Ireland. Chapter 4. Jill Ireland, Love Tied Up by Jealousy. It was summer 1962 on the set of The Great Escape in Bavaria, Germany. A young actress named Jill Ireland showed up with her husband, a Scottish rising star named David McCallum. He had just gotten famous from a show called The Man from UNCLE. Among all the laughter and talking, Bronson, who was both McCallum's co-star and close friend, looked at her. He didn't say much. He only said in his deep voice, "Someday I'll marry your wife." Everyone laughed, thinking it was just a joke. No one thought those words would actually come true. 3 years later, Jill and McCallum got divorced. In 1968, she and Bronson had a quiet wedding in California. The Los Angeles Times wrote, "A friendship turned into love, and then into a scandal that stunned Hollywood." Behind all the glamour, their relationship had everything: passion, possessiveness, and fear. Bronson loved Jill so much that he wanted her by his side in every film. From Rider on the Rain and The Mechanic to Love and Bullets, wherever Bronson was, Jill was there too. He chose her roles, checked every scene, and even adjusted her costumes to make sure nothing was too close or romantic with male co-stars. Friends said that whenever Jill got offers to do movies by herself, Bronson always found a way to make her turn them down. A director named Michael Winner, who worked with them both on The Mechanic, told The Guardian in 2005 Charles was a man who didn't compromise. He truly loved Jill, but his love was like a chain, heavy and tightening. But even such controlled love couldn't avoid problems. In the mid-1970s, rumors started spreading that Jill and Winner were closer than they should be. Both of them denied it, but the media didn't stop. People magazine in 1975 ran a headline that said, "The Iron Man's Jealous Rage." Bronson stayed silent, but people who worked on the movie set said he left for 3 days without speaking to anyone. By 1984, Jill was diagnosed with breast cancer. Hollywood was shocked and Bronson nearly fell apart. He stopped working, wrote books with her, and appeared together in campaigns for medical research. Jill's autobiography, called Life Wish, came out in 1986 and became the year's best-selling book in the U.S. But when you read through its pages, you could still feel the quiet loneliness of a woman who was loved too tightly. On May 18, 1990, Jill Ireland passed away at her Malibu home. She was 54 years old. The funeral was private. Bronson's name wasn't on the guest list. He stood outside Forest Lawn Cemetery wearing a black hat, silently looking down. A reporter from Entertainment Tonight later said, "No one heard him cry, but everyone saw his shoulders shake once." Years later, when Bronson died in 2003, people found a small photo in his room. It was of the two of them during a trip to Italy in 1971. On the back, he had written, "I still see her every morning." That love was everything. And it was also the thing that took away the last bit of softness in Charles Bronson's heart. After Jill, his world was filled only with shadows and memories of women from the past. Harriet Tendler, who left him during his hard years, and Kim Weeks, who stayed with him in his final days. Both left marks in different ways, like two mirrors reflecting what was left after a lifetime of fame. Chapter 5. Harriet Tendler, the woman from the past and an old wound. Before the world knew Charles Bronson as the tough, silent man from action movies, he was simply Charles Bakinski, the son of a poor coal miner's family in Ehrenfeld, Pennsylvania. No fame, no money, just rough hands and a dream of escaping the coal dust that covered his life. And in that darkness he met Harriet Tendler, the gentle neighbor who once told him, "As long as you can smile, being poor isn't scary." They got married in 1949, shortly after Bronson left the military. The wedding was so small there were no rings, just a simple church ceremony before going back to their tiny rented room where Bronson drew sketches for a few dollars. Harriet took in laundry and took care of their child while he worked as a painter. They lived on hope. But a few years later, when Bronson decided to chase acting, everything started to crack. He quit the factory and moved to Philadelphia to study drama at the Playhouse School of the Theater, while Harriet stayed home to raise their child. The letters between them became fewer and fewer. A friend remembered one letter where Bronson wrote, "I want you to be proud of me, not just know I'm covered in coal dust." But Harriet was scared he was changing. And he was. In 1951, when Bronson got his first small role in a movie called You're in the Navy Now with Gary Cooper, Harriet sent him divorce papers. The local newspaper mentioned it briefly. No one paid attention. But almost 30 years later, the past came back. In 1975, when Bronson was already the star of Death Wish, Harriet suddenly appeared on a British TV show called This Is Your Life. When they asked how she felt about her former husband, who was now a legend, Harriet smiled through tears and said, "I once thought we'd grow old together, but I was wrong. He didn't need me anymore once Hollywood came." That TV show got huge attention. The Daily Mirror newspaper had a headline that said, "The woman who left the man who became Charles Bronson." The next day, Harriet got a strange phone call from Los Angeles. A man's voice said briefly, "Thank you for mentioning me, but the past doesn't need repeating." Many people believed it was Bronson himself. Years later, Harriet revealed in an ITV News interview that she once flew to Canada in 1981 when Bronson was filming Death Hunt. She brought their old wedding photo and a handwritten letter. But when she got to the movie set, his assistant handed her an envelope. Inside was a check and a note that said, "Live well. No meeting, no words." Later, Bronson admitted to a journalist named Lawrence Grobel in a 1988 interview that he didn't hate Harriet, but also never wanted to hear her name again. He said, "She left me when I was nobody, then came back when it was too late. I don't believe in the tears of the past." To Bronson, Harriet represented the softness he never wanted again. For Harriet, people said she carried that regret to her last breath. She died in 2003 at age 73. In her small home in Shropshire, they found a photo of the young couple on her dresser with a handwritten note that said, "You dreamed of escaping the darkness, but that darkness swallowed your heart." A love without a happy ending, but the beginning of Bronson's lifelong wounds. And as time carried him into his late 70s, another woman appeared, young, gentle, and destined to stir up Hollywood once more. Chapter 6. Kim Weeks, the widow living in a giant shadow. It was December 1998. News spread across Hollywood. 77-year-old Charles Bronson had remarried. His new wife was 37-year-old actress Kim Weeks. She was a little-known television actress who appeared briefly in shows like Cheers and The Love Boat. They met at a charity auction in Malibu in 1996, where Bronson was a guest of honor. According to Vanity Fair magazine, Kim walked up to him and said she had long admired Jill Ireland, his late wife. That comment made the entire table go silent. When Bronson decided to remarry, the public reacted strongly. The Daily Mail called it a marriage in the shadow of a legend. Some people claimed Kim entered his life not for love, but for opportunity. By then, Bronson was old and weak, while she was still trying to find her place in the entertainment world. According to a former housekeeper, Bronson's Bel Air home stayed exactly as Jill Ireland had left it. Everything, from the wedding photo in the hallway to her perfume bottles on the dresser, was untouched. Even the bedroom was left the same. Kim reportedly suggested redoing the house to start fresh, but Bronson refused. He said, "No one cleans up history." That line became headline material. People magazine wrote that Bronson lived with the memory of the woman who had died, while the living woman was only a passing shadow. Kim Weeks stayed silent, even though the media chased her constantly. Late 1990s talk shows like Entertainment Tonight often discuss the unusual romance between the Iron Man and the woman 40 years younger. When Bronson passed away on August 30, 2003, things got even more tense. Kim Weeks was declared his legal heir, meaning she inherited most of his money and property, including the rights to his image and films. His family, especially his daughter Zuleika Bronson, strongly objected. They accused Kim of turning their father into a brand. In 2005, The Hollywood Reporter revealed that Kim Weeks had signed a deal with Silver Screen Partners to re-release Bronson's film collection. The news caused a big stir. Some people saw it as honoring his legacy. Others viewed it as cold business. After a few years, Kim withdrew from public life. She lived quietly in New York, avoiding the press. On the 20th anniversary of Bronson's death, she didn't attend the memorial. She only sent a bouquet of white flowers to Forest Lawn Cemetery with a card that read, "You once said the past shouldn't be cleaned up. I kept my promise." To the film world, Kim Weeks remained controversial. Some called her the woman who saved Bronson from loneliness. Others called her the unwanted final chapter of a legend. Either way, Kim Weeks marked the perfect ending to a life covered in darkness, where every woman who crossed Bronson's path left a scar, not on his body, but on his soul. And as her story closed, Hollywood took another turn, not toward love, but toward the clash between art and fame, between young women chasing dreams and a legend who no longer believed in anything but silence. Chapter 7. Susan George, Innocence Wounded. It was Hollywood, 1970, when director Richard Fleischer began making a movie called Lola, also known as Twinkie in Europe. He imagined it as a story about the distance between generations and the limits of love. But what audiences didn't know was that the film became one of the most uncomfortable experiences in the career of Susan George, a young English actress who was only 20 at the time. Playing opposite her on screen was Charles Bronson, who was nearly 3 decades older. Filming took place mainly in London and Malta. The story was about a relationship between a middle-aged American writer and a young schoolgirl. When the film came out, critics called it a cultural shock, and the young actress became a new symbol of rebellion in British cinema. But behind the scenes, nothing was glamorous. In a rare interview with the Sunday Telegraph in 2001, Susan George revealed that filming the intimate scenes made her shake more than act. She explained, "It wasn't because Bronson behaved badly, but because he was so real, so strict, that I felt like I was being tested, not performing with a colleague." A crew member remembered that during one shoot in Malta, the director asked for multiple takes of a hugging scene because of lighting problems. Bronson kept a serious face and said nothing, while Susan was nearly in tears. After the scene, she reportedly couldn't sleep for days. The Guardian, in its 1971 article called "Behind the Lens of Lola," described, "The air on set was thick. On one side, a heavy, experienced man like a boulder. On the other, a young woman just stepping off the theater stage." When the film premiered in the UK, it got an 18+ rating, and many theaters refused to show it. Critics called it a blatant exploitation of young femininity, which threw Susan George into a media storm. Even though she was the one affected, she became labeled as fiery, a sensual symbol. A reputation she later admitted had redirected her entire career. Meanwhile, Bronson moved past Lola and into The Mechanic and Death Wish, two films that cemented his image as the Man of Iron. But from that time on, he started speaking more strongly about female performers. He told the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, "Real actors don't cry for audiences. They cry for their craft. Those who cry for attention aren't worth working with." People believed he was talking about Susan George, whom he considered immature and undisciplined. From that point on, they never spoke again, even when appearing at the same film events. But Susan's story was only the beginning of a series of clashes between Bronson and strong-willed actresses. The next one was Lee Remick, a woman who not only challenged him on set but also triggered one of the few moments of visible anger in his entire career. Chapter 8. Lee Remick, the woman who refused to be ignored. If we are to respect man, then we must save man from himself and from the poison of alcoholic spirit. When a movie called Telephone began filming in fall 1977 in Moscow, everyone on set knew that the combination of Charles Bronson and Lee Remick would not be easy. He was a former soldier, disciplined, serious, and rarely smiling. She was an Oscar-nominated actress, smart, outspoken, and known for an acting intuition so strong it often overpowered her co-stars. From the first script reading, the atmosphere turned icy. According to assistant director Don Siegel, Bronson gave instructions. "No one should talk to me during shooting hours." Remick, however, had a habit of discussing emotions before each scene to find authenticity. When she tried to start a conversation, he simply glanced at her and said quietly, "We don't need to talk to understand each other." What sounded like professional philosophy turned out to be the beginning of 3 months of tension. Remick later told the Los Angeles Times that Bronson did everything. Precisely, not a single step wrong, but with such coldness that you felt like you were acting with a wall. Things reached a breaking point during a scene in Red Square where Remick had to run to embrace Bronson after an explosion. She fell for real and scraped her hand, but Bronson, with no expression on his face, finished the scene without helping her up. When the director yelled, "Cut!" Remick burst into tears and left the set. The incident leaked to the press. Variety wrote, "Bronson, too rigid. Remick, too emotional. Two extremes that cannot coexist." Even though the film later became a box office success, their relationship ended there. When asked if she'd work with him again, Remick gave a faint smile and said, "Once is enough. I'm not afraid of him, just afraid of being treated like I don't exist." At that time, Remick's personal life was also troubled. After separating from director John Phillips, she faced rumors of heavy drinking during the making of Days of Wine and Roses, 1962. Even though the performance earned her an Oscar nomination, she became tagged as difficult. Her struggles with alcohol later caused her to lose many opportunities. Bronson, who worshipped discipline, saw it as proof of the weakness Hollywood indulges. He once told Corriere della Sera, "I don't blame the weak. I just can't work with them." Remick, in her final interview on CBS Sunday Morning in 1989, when asked about Bronson, said softly, "He's a man who never understood that sometimes gentleness is what makes people truly strong." Between them, there was no resentment, only an unbridgeable gap. One lived for structure. The other lived for feeling. Two souls before the camera, never truly touching. That story ended, but Hollywood wasn't done testing Bronson against strong women. Because after Remick came another name, one that brought with her a storm. Peggy Lipton, the woman who would lead him into the fiercest debate of his life over art, ethics, and human boundaries. Chapter 9. Peggy Lipton, the muse torn between morality and desire. By the late 1980s, Hollywood was changing. The golden generation of stars had begun to fade, making way for new, bolder names. But while many actors tried to adapt to modern times, Charles Bronson, then over 65, stayed loyal to his old-fashioned, rigid, and rule-bound cinema. That was when Peggy Lipton, a woman of gentle beauty yet quiet rebellion, entered his orbit. Their meeting would become one of the most silent yet deep conflicts in Bronson's career. Peggy Lipton was born in 1946 in New York. She became famous with her role as Julie Barnes in ABC's hit series The Mod Squad, making her an icon of 1970s hippie chic style. On screen, she was the image of a smart, free-spirited woman, loving yet independent. Off-screen, Lipton fascinated the press with her colorful personal life. People said she was rumored to have been close to Paul McCartney, Elvis Presley, and later Keith Moon of The Who. But the real media storm came when she publicly began a relationship with black musician Quincy Jones, an act that was then considered defying social convention. American media, still not used to such relationships, sensationalized their romance. Magazines like Rolling Stone and People ran headlines such as Peggy Lipton and Quincy Jones, Love Beyond Color, or Just a Rebellious Passion. The couple married in 1974 and had 2 daughters. One of them, Rashida Jones, would later star in The Office. But their marriage was turbulent, full of ups and downs. Lipton admitted in her memoir, Breathing Out, that she suffered from anxiety and confusion. She said, "I didn't know where I belonged in this world." In the middle of that turmoil, Lipton decided to return to film. She accepted a role in Kinjite, Forbidden Subjects, 1989, directed by J. Lee Thompson with Charles Bronson as the lead. The film was about a detective fighting moral crimes in Los Angeles. It mixed violence and social ethics together. From the beginning, Lipton was skeptical. She had doubts. According to Variety, she argued during a script meeting in Los Angeles that the story used morality to justify exploiting women. Bronson, known for his cold realism, said back that art must reach the core of truth, even when truth is uncomfortable. They represented 2 opposite worlds. Lipton was free, empathetic, and humanistic. Bronson was disciplined, rigid, and viewed film as a weapon to expose reality. A crew member told a story about a heated moment during a shoot in downtown LA when Lipton refused to do a scene involving emotional distress that the director wanted to push to the limit. She said it was excessive and unnecessary. Bronson, unmoved, told her, "If you can't portray truth, don't be an actor." That remark made Lipton cry and walk off the set. Entertainment Weekly later covered the incident in its 1990 article called When Reality Hurts, describing it as a clash between 2 acting philosophies, art as emotion versus art as endurance. Kinjite was completed and released in March 1989, but it got very mixed reactions. Some critics praised Bronson for bravely exposing society's darkness, while others called it a confused, moralistic film full of contradictions. Lipton skipped the premiere, saying she had health reasons, but later admitted on Larry King Live, "I knew I didn't belong to that kind of cinema." When Bronson was asked about her absence, he simply said, "I don't need others to agree with me to do what's right." From then on, they never spoke again. Lipton went back to television and then mostly disappeared from Hollywood through the 1990s. She came back later in David Lynch's Twin Peaks in a soft, thoughtful role that was very different from her earlier controversies. Ironically, Kinjite, the film that divided them, marked the end of both their major film careers. It was Bronson's last leading role before retirement and Lipton's final big-screen appearance for more than a decade. Later, critics viewed their relationship as 2 poles of old and new Hollywood. One believed cinema should reveal raw human nature. The other believed it should heal the soul. They didn't dislike each other personally. They simply stood for two completely different truths about the same thing: what art means. But Charles Bronson's life was not just the journey of an action star. It was the portrait of a deeply conflicted man, lonely beneath the spotlight. Behind the steel facade he had loved, been wounded, and carried within him a list of people he could never forgive. Those 9 women, each in her own way, reflected pieces of the most real version of the man of iron. Strong, proud, but full of unseen cracks within. And you, among those 9 names, who do you believe stirred Bronson's deepest resentment? Leave your thoughts below, and don't forget to click subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next untold story from behind the scenes of Hollywood.